be here, and I'm delighted to be chairing the session. Just suddenly heard myself getting very loud. This is a keynote, and there's not typically a Q&A for a keynote, but Holly has said that if she runs a little bit ahead of time, she's happy to take questions, and I have the terrifying job of trying to manage them through this app thingy. However, if we don't have time for questions, they will still be responded to through the app as best we can afterwards. So you don't want to hear me, you want to hear the fabulous Holly Smale, who is the multi-million best-selling author of the fabulously titled Geek Girl. And Holly's just let me in a bit of hot off the press news that Geek Girl is going to be made into a Netflix original production, which is obviously phenomenal for representation. So yeah, let's all wave to that one. Many of you will know Holly through that work, and also that she's a passionate advocate for neurodivergency. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand you over to Holly. Enjoy.
Okay, so my speech is on the masks we wear. I've tried to keep it relatively specific, but yeah, here we go. To some extent, wearing a mask is part of being human. We're not exactly the same people with our children that we are with our friends. We don't talk to our boss the way we speak to our parents. We wouldn't wear dog walking clothes to a wedding. We don't swear in front of our grandparents, and most of us have a slightly different voice when we pick up the phone, especially if we're talking to a bank and trying to extend our overdrafts. Subtly altering ourselves to fit an environment is part of being human, and most people do it to some extent or another. But when you're neurodivergent, masking is on a completely different level. It's not a flimsy mask you pick up now and then when it feels convenient or helpful. It is something you do constantly, every minute of every day, to such an extent that it becomes who you are. It's a mask that incorporates every single element of being human, and which becomes impossible to put down even as it grows unbearably heavy, even as it destroys the person underneath it. I didn't know I was autistic until a couple of years ago, but I always knew that I was masking. I remember sitting in my therapist's chair trying to explain that I felt like an actress all of the time, that I felt I had to change the very essence of my being just to exist, that I felt like a fake, a fraud, and that I had no idea who I was underneath it all. Before I knew I was neurodivergent or had even heard of the term masking, I remember saying to my therapist, "It feels like I'm wearing a mask all of the time, and I'm so exhausted I don't know how to continue." For most of my life, I believed I was simply broken, that whatever it required to be human, I simply didn't have it. My childhood was traumatic, and I'll come back to that, but I think on some level I believed that I was the way I was, that life was so hard because I was simply traumatized, that there had been something that had happened that had changed me. There are actually prominent people out there who still think autistic women are just traumatized, no names mentioned, but I swallowed this nonsense too. So I took myself to therapy in the hope that I could untangle and heal some kind of trauma and somehow emerge a whole and normal person. But as I sat in my therapist's chair and we slowly worked through my memories, I began to realize that no matter how far back I went, there was a core me that stayed the same. Like a lot of autistic people, I have a slightly computer-like long-term memory. So I have clear memories of myself as early as 2. I was an intense, focused, fiercely individual and self-contained child who was ridiculously passionate about specific topics and could engage in one activity for 11 hours without moving a muscle. I either spoke not at all, and I was late to start speaking, or I spoke in direct and lengthy monologues, not unlike this one. I collected trolls and lined them up in order of size, then colour, took photos of them and made them into a family album. I wouldn't sit on the grass because it was dirty, and I ate the same 2 foods over and over again. I passionately hated eggs, which were slimy, and any fruit that was squidgy or toast that wasn't rectangular. I had 0 sense of humour. I was also hyperlexic. I started reading at 2, and by 3 I could write. By 5 I was constructing full poetry in perfect rhyming heroic couplets and constructing my own novels out of cardboard. I was an extremely content and busy little girl. As I worked through my memories, I remembered very clearly how it felt to be that little girl, and I realized with a sense of surprise how joyful I was. I was utterly myself. I was unfazed by other people, but curious about them. I was completely absorbed by the beauty of the world and my own brain, and I had no concept that anything about me was wrong or different. It was the last time I could remember being totally happy. I also remembered the moment where that started to change. My first day of nursery at 3 years old, I was sitting in a dark corner on my own, facing a wall, teaching myself how to read, and I heard a laugh. I remember looking out of the window and observing my peers playing in the sunshine. I watched them for a few moments, intensely curious, and I remember thinking, I am not the same as you. And then, epiphany over, I went back to reading. By the time I started school the following year, masking had started. I very quickly ascertained that there was something wrong with me. And I knew this because people told me, either directly or through a more typically indirect neurotypical way. I'm observant, even if I don't always appear to be listening, and when people made comments about me, I paid attention. My peers, older children, teachers, and adults who discussed me over my head as if I wasn't there. There was something odd about me, something creepy and weird, robotic even, not quite human. Yes, I was also talented, gifted, a special child, but none of that was particularly interesting to me. I was paying attention to the frankly far more detailed and specific issues they had with me and the things that made me not the way I should be. And they were legion. I'm not sure a lot of neurotypical people can fully understand what it's like to have every single part of who you are analysed, dissected, discussed, and ripped apart on a daily basis. I was told I spoke weirdly. My voice was flat in tone. I monologued about things I loved. I was direct to the point of rudeness. My vocabulary was formal and my syntax old-fashioned. I absorbed this information and, desperate to be liked and accepted, consciously began to make my voice more musical, to stop talking about what interested me, to run through sentences in my head before translating them into normal human speech. I scripted long conversations in my head, obsessively, on every possible topic, so that I wouldn't get them wrong and I'd be ready when that topic got here. And I still do that. If my eyes suddenly light up and I shift into a very strangely eloquently speech pattern, it's because I've already written that speech in my head. I tried to incorporate slang in an incredibly awkward and frankly unsuccessful way. I didn't laugh or smile very easily, and that made me unappealing, apparently, so I learnt to start faking it and praying to God it was at the right time and in the right way, which it frankly wasn't. My interests were considered boring, so I hid them and tried to engage in what other people liked, which didn't seem to be that much as far as I could tell. I was very intense, so I tried to be breezier and more casual. I moved and sat strangely, so I monitored every muscle movement and tried to change it. I was distant and robotic, so I watched the facial movements of other people and copied them, to such an extent that now when I'm watching television, my face automatically does the same expression as the actor on TV. My meltdowns were considered instability and hysteria, so I slowly, over years, learnt to control them until I'm somewhere safe and private, where I promptly black out of overwhelm. Sensory sensitivity has always been incredibly painful, constantly, but little by little, I learnt to simply exist in a state of intense pain while showing as little of it as physically possible. This state of pain is a constant thing for me. Masking means pain. I force myself to make eye contact when it hurts like a million needles being rammed into my head. I allow myself to be touched even though it burns me. I was laughed at and snapped at by teachers for stimming, so the only relief I could find was no longer an option for me. I made them as tiny as possible, hid them by sticking my hands in my pockets so that no one would see them, repeatedly scrunching my toes inside my shoes. My verbal stims, which were squeaks, meows, repeated words, I learnt to turn into coughs or throat clearing. I also have alexithymia and struggled to identify and process and express emotions as a child and now as an adult, and it made me seem a bit off. So I learnt to be in a constant state of confusion and overwhelm while expressing no emotion at all. The way I thought was strange, linear, logic-based, so I learnt to feel shame at the way that my brain worked and to hide it as much as possible. I'm also dyspraxic, so I learnt to move slowly so that I could hide my inability to control my muscle motions. And I'm a synesthete, so I learnt to hide my experiences of light and sound in case it made me look mad. This is the tip of the iceberg. There is no part of being human, speaking, thinking, feeling, moving, interacting with others that I didn't note, observe, and then consciously change in myself. And it requires constant monitoring. For almost my entire life, I have altered every atom of who I am to fit others, to be accepted by others, and to keep myself safe. And it didn't work. No matter what I did, there was something other about me, something that marked me out as someone strange, weird, unlikable, unlovable, a target. I felt it, and so did everyone else. What started as children sitting in a different part of the playground or laughing at my show and tell collection of rocks slowly morphed into something darker and far more insidious. By the time I was 16, I was broken. I was called names constantly, stabbed with pencils. I had shoes thrown at my head and took to hiding under piles of coats in the changing room so that I could melt down far away from my classmates. I hated everything about myself. I hated everything about my life. No matter how hard I masked, and I was masking as hard as I possibly could, it was never enough. And I would return home, exhausted to a point of being non-verbal and unable to move. I want to say that after school it got better, but that's not quite accurate. What got better was my ability to mask. After 10 years, 20 years, 40 years of masking, of honing, of observing, of monitoring and practicing, I am remarkably good at it. I am, frankly, an Oscar-worthy actress for my ability to come across as completely neurotypical. In any given situation, I can be whatever I want to be, and I can be whatever you want me to be. I can slap a mask on and pass as normal, and I can adapt it for different situations. The mask I wear when I'm socializing is different to the mask I wear when I'm at work. The mask I wear on a romantic date is very different to the one I wear when I'm on public transport. I am masking right now. So in many ways, my ability to mask has helped me. It has allowed me to live what many might consider a relatively normal life. But it has also destroyed me. My mask is heavy. By the time I got my autism diagnosis at the age of 38, I was on my knees. I had no idea what was under the mask. I was a fraud, a fake, an actress, and I was exhausted, severely depressed, and I hated myself. Because while I can mask for short periods of time, it's an effort and it takes time to recover afterwards. The harder I mask, the more time it takes and the heavier the mask gets, which has made relationships, friendships, jobs, travel incredibly difficult to sustain. Impossible, often. I've been single with a few blips for pretty much 40 years. I've been fired from multiple jobs or simply run away and not come back. Because a mask is too heavy to wear for long periods. At some point, the mask has to come down, and when it does, people are often shocked by what lies underneath. They don't want it, and they feel cheated. The only time, ironically, that I have never masked is when I'm writing. When I'm writing, I am me. There is no artifice, no charade. Writing has been my only access to myself, my real self, and probably for that reason, it has always been the thing I have loved more than anything else. It might also be the reason I've been successful at it, because it's the only place I can communicate as I was supposed to. When I finally got my autism diagnosis, there was a sense of relief. Finally, an explanation, but also a deep sense of grief. For nearly 4 decades, I had been someone else. I had learnt to not be myself. I had learnt to undo myself, and it was not going to be easy to unpick. One of the biggest misconceptions was that the mask was something that now I knew it existed, I would be able to just take off and put down. One famous radio presenter asked me live on air, "Are you masking now?" And I said, "Yes, obviously I'm masking now, I'm on national radio." And he replied with, "Can you stop so we can see what it's like?" As if I was an actress and I could just put a roll down. As if I hadn't lived with a mask for nearly 40 years and it wasn't glued to my face. Masking is exhausting, but so is unmasking. It's undoing everything you've learnt to be from birth, and I have to be honest, it's scary. The reaction from others is normally negative. People don't want you to mask because you're a fake, but they're also not that happy with what happens when you stop. And the reality is, as my therapist pointed out, my mask was and is necessary. My mask is basic self-protection against a world who doesn't like difference or autistic people that much. My mask has kept me safe to some extent. Safer, I should say, although not by much. Like 9 out of 10 autistic women, I too have been sexually assaulted and raped. I may be able to pass as neurotypical, but I am still wired autistic, and I am still vulnerable, like autistic people can be. We don't see red flags, we don't see danger signals a lot of the time. We trust that people do and say what they really mean they want to do and say. So my mask has not been enough to protect me. And frankly, it's not always safe to unmask. When people tell you to be yourself, for an autistic person, it is far more complex, far more vulnerable, and far more dangerous than they think it is. My masking is exhausting, but it is also a privilege. I am a white, blonde, cis woman who isn't just capable at masking, but lives in a world where people are happy to accept this mask. When my mask slips, people are quick to misread it in my favour. If I start stimming in a supermarket queue, bouncing or squeaking or scratching, people tend to smile at me. They don't see me as an anxious autistic woman, overwhelmed because people are standing too close to me. They see me as a tall, quirky blonde filled with irrepressible energy and a love of life. When I can't make eye contact, people tend to see me as shy or arrogant or aloof. If I'm obsessive about schedules and timings, I'm just a bit type A. My meltdowns are drama because I'm an artist. My mask isn't just a conscious effort, it is also, like the masks we all wear, made up partly of the body I was born into and the way that the world sees that. And that is, in many ways, a privilege. I am allowed to pass through the world as a neurotypical person because the world has decided I'm allowed to. And not everyone is that lucky. For those of us who are either less proficient at masking or who live in bodies that the world has already decided is other, it is even harder and it is even more dangerous to unmask. So whether we mask or unmask, try to mask or fail, when you're autistic, there really is no winning. What my diagnosis has done, however, is to make me more aware of when and how to put the mask down, slowly and tentatively. I can start to unmask slightly when it feels more comfortable, when it feels safe, and when I'm with people I trust. I unmask more when I'm at home, and I've started to find joy in letting myself do the things I've suppressed for so long, enjoy my special interests in all their bewildering intensity, stim as large and excitedly as I want to, allow myself to hyper-focus without feeling like I'm strange. If I don't want to make eye contact now, I don't. If I don't want to moderate my voice, I don't. And I am exploring the furthest reaches of my inner autistic self in my writing, as I always have, and I'm continuing to write books about it, books which are hopefully reaching other people and making it more easy for people to see what it's like on the inside of being autistic rather than how we're seen from the outside. And when I don't want to drop the mask, when I need it to stay safe, to stay comfortable, then I allow myself to keep it. Ultimately, we want to live in a world where autistic people can be their most authentic autistic selves without shame, without fear, without anxiety, and without abuse. That is part of why I'm such a passionate advocate for celebrating neurodivergency. I want to be part of a better world where autistic people don't have to start masking in the first place. But in the meantime, I've reconnected with the tiny version of me that didn't feel a need to mask, because she knew that the world was beautiful and her mind was beautiful. I have found a way to give that little girl inside me room and freedom and love. I have found a way to feel compassion for her instead of hating the adult she turned into. I have accepted and embraced her, and it has been life-changing. Slowly but surely, I am finding my autistic happiness again. I am discovering who I am, and I am discovering that underneath the mask, I am exactly who I am supposed to be. And that's that. It's like 20 minutes short. So there's loads of time for Q&A if there is any.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions and you've still got time to pop a few more in. Holly, somebody's asking, this is someone who's an autistic psychologist and who works with autistic young people. How can those kinds of people help use your platform as an author to advocate for change? So how can people boost the drive for change.
I'm not allowed to say buy my books, am I?
Yeah, go ahead. Buy our books, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wish I knew what the kind of, I'm feeling my way as well, you know. I think we're all coming at it from different angles, which is the best way, you know. We're breaking a lot of eggs to make one omelette. And, you know, I think that if we can help kind of promote authentic autistic voices, you know, authentic creators and characters who are, you know, written by real people with real experiences. I think that, I mean, from a creative perspective, what's really important to me is that, you know, we can tell the world what it's like to be autistic as much as we want to, but if we use the kind of vehicle of fiction and storytelling, sometimes it's easier for them to swallow it a little bit. Like, I've had people read my new adult book, which is coming out in May, and it's called The Cassandra Complex. But I had my family read that, and it has an autistic protagonist who's based, well, not based on me, she's me. And my own family hadn't understood what it was like to be me. My best friends read it and were like, we had no idea what it was like to be inside your head. And my sister, who's known me for, like, you know, her entire life, 38 years, was like, so many of the weird things you do now make sense. And for me, that was mind-boggling, because I was like, I've known you my entire life, and you didn't understand why I do the things I do or say the things I say until it was written down in a fictional story. So I think that there's so much room for you know, all of us to be contributing to this movement of celebration of neurodivergency, but not just celebration, of understanding, and that seems more important to me. Because if we can understand each other, then there's going to be more empathy, there's going to be more compassion for people that experience the world differently. And from my perspective, I'm coming at it from a creative, fictional perspective. You know, if I can get beloved autistic characters out there, like Harriet in Geek Girl, who, you know, 3.5 million books, 3.5 million people at least have read Harriet and love her, and she's an autistic teenage girl. And that helps to shift the needle a little bit. It helps make people go, it isn't what we think it is. It isn't always represented in the way that we think it should be. Like, I think that from a creative perspective, that's kind of my angle. So I guess, yeah, support the artists that are speaking their truth and can only ever give one voice, because that's all we only have is one voice each. But, you know, I think from a fictional and creative perspective, like, I'm hoping Netflix having a neurodivergent female character, like, go worldwide is going to help a little bit shift it. Yeah. I'm sure hopefully well. I mean, I'm trying.
I'm sure it will. There's something in what you're saying there that strikes me, that, you know, the masking is almost for everybody else's convenience and not for yours. And I think that, you know, when you're saying about your sister, that's a really important point, isn't it? That we've got, you know, people talking about masking, but also neurotypical or non-autistic or non-neurodivergent people accepting people without the mask is an important part of that dynamic as well, isn't it?
And if they can understand it, which, you know, from a more kind of internal perspective, which is the beauty of fiction, because you can really show how to be someone else, how to live in someone else's shoes. That's the beauty of books generally. If we can show them the understanding, then the compassion comes with it, I think. And, you know, like, for my own sister to say, I didn't understand the weird shit you do, or that I didn't realize there was logic behind it. And I was like, why do you think I do things? Like, it's not, you know, why do you think I go into a pub and try out 7 different tables before I choose the one that I'm going to sit at? It's not just some random, like, fun thing that I do. I have to make sure that it's in exactly the right, you know, it has to be in the right lighting, the right heat, the right noise level, the right stickiness of the table, the right sense of the chairs. Like, I have to be facing the right way, you know. I'm essentially Sheldon Cooper. But because I don't say that and I don't explain it, and I don't go into a pub and say, right, everyone, I'm just going to go and monitor every single table now before I pick a seat, people think I'm just doing weird shit. And so I think that, you know, with the beauty of fiction and books, we get to understand something that's much more deeper and makes sense inside us, even if it doesn't make sense to other people. Yeah. I think understanding breeds compassion. I do. And I think that compassion will change the way that we're treated. And as we're changing the way we're treated, we'll start to unmask more. So it's unpicking, but it's a slow process.
Yeah, you're certainly resonating with people in the room. Someone wants to thank you for your honesty and candour and identifying really heavily with all the things that you're saying. There's a question from someone: as a masking autistic woman, can I ask if you are scared for old age when our masks slip more with less energy to put them on?
Yes, I am actually. My mum is autistic, and she has become more obviously autistic as she gets older, because, as you say, the energy just wears off. So it does make you more vulnerable, and so I am scared. I'm hoping that the world will be changing to such a level that it will be less scary by the time I'm, well, let's be honest, not that far in the future. But I'm hoping that it will be a more safe place for people to be old and autistic. But I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that that's the case, but it might be optimism from my perspective.
That's all we've got sometimes is optimism, isn't it?
Yeah.
A parent of an autistic 9-year-old girl, so much of what you say is resonating with them. How would you suggest I best support her as she grows up?
I think that, it can be difficult sometimes to not bring your own perception of what is normal and what is not normal to a child. And I won't go into details, but I have a child close to me who is also neurodivergent. And I find myself doing it. I find myself being like, don't have a meltdown in the middle of a supermarket. And then I hear myself say it and think, well, that was what was said to me as well. Like, so where does this pattern break? So it can be sometimes hard to push against it and say, actually, it's okay if you want to monologue about your love of dinosaurs for 45 minutes without taking a breath. It's about supporting the ways that they are their truest selves. And when they find things that bring them joy, and when people find things that make them happy, encourage it and support it, and convince them that even if other people aren't that sure about it, even if the other people think that it makes them weird, it doesn't. It's not always easy, but there are things about me that are extraordinary, and they are because I'm autistic. There is no part of me that is good that is not because I'm autistic. So I think it's about celebrating those parts of us, as well as, supporting the parts of us which are struggling. And it's a kind of dual angle. So I think it's about encouraging the joyful parts and the loving parts, and supporting the bits that are hard.
And do you think that advice changes as people get older? There's someone asking about, what would you say to teenage autistic girls? Does it change as you grow up and develop then, that masking issue?
Not enormously, to be honest. I think that, it was harder when I was a teenager. Masking was definitely harder, and I was way worse at it. I wouldn't say it's become necessarily easier. Like, I'm more comfortable around friends now and family with being more my unmasked self. But it isn't necessarily easy, and I don't do it all the time. I'm frequently masking around anybody, to be honest. So I think that, with teenagers, hopefully we're going to live in a world where it becomes more acceptable to just be you. But I don't know if it necessarily changes as you get older. I'm no less autistic now than I was when I was 15. I'm just much better at convincing people that I'm not, which I shouldn't have to do. But as I've said, it's not always safe to not.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm sure lots of people are finding these answers really helpful. Someone's asking, do you find certain parts of your neurodivergence easier to unmask than others?
I've become, like I mentioned, my sensory issues are quite intense. So I've become better, and actually my friends and family, having read my adult book and understanding a bit more about the way I work, they've become more supportive in saying, this pub is too loud, this pub is too crowded, would you like to go somewhere else? Although some people still, unbelievably, even when I'm openly autistic and I openly talk about how I don't like to be touched, I still have people saying, but it's okay if it's me, isn't it? And then giving me a massive bear hug. And I'm like, it's still not okay, but I have to say it's okay, because otherwise it's incredibly rude. I think that, from a sensory perspective, I'm giving myself more leeway. I wear my noise-cancelling headphones more often. I go to quiet places, I sit in the dark. it's still really hard to monologue at people about my special interests. I've been trained not to. I can't, sit and chat about exactly what I want to talk about without feeling like I'm a bore. So yeah, there are parts of it that I still can't unmask, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. Lots of comments as well. People that want to thank you for your book and thank you for your sincerity and your courageous honesty in your talk. Someone's asking, how did you begin to find the edges of your mask?
I think part of it was going back to when I was a kid in my head. When I went back to who I used to be when I was little, I remembered how I used to communicate, how I used to move, how I used to be fascinated by things. And I think that almost going back to that and start going, what was I like? How did I exist in when I didn't realize that there was something wrong or different about me? And so kind of channeling that inner child has helped me to work out where I'm masking and where I'm not. And also when I'm masking, as I mentioned, I get tired. And I think in certain situations where I'm like, I am becoming exhausted very quickly, that's kind of a bit of a red flag that I am masking very hard. And I then try to very slowly and carefully work out how I could mask slightly less. And if people I'm around don't like it, then I stay away from those people. So yeah, it's a lifelong process, to be honest. I don't think you can be masking for 40 years and then suddenly just pop it off like a Greek tragedy mask and put it on the floor. But yeah, it is that tentative finding out, how does my voice sound when I'm talking? So I don't mask with my mum really at all. She's autistic too, so we have like a kind of a very up and down relationship. But I notice that when I'm with her, my voice is very flat. When I'm with her, I'm very direct. When I'm with her, I often don't bother making eye contact. If we're on Zoom, I'll just be staring at something in the corner. So often it's when I'm with people that I know I don't mask around, I pay attention to what it is I'm doing differently with the people that I don't have to try hard. And I think that we can, for autistic people, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think we can all say that, trying hard seems to be a defining feature. Everything is trying, and, trying to not try is trying as well. So it's quite an exhausting existence. So yeah, it's just trying to work out where are the places and the people that I don't have to try so hard with. What am I doing? And how can I spend more time with them? How can I expand those people to allow me to move without so much effort?
So I guess the message is be one of those people who people don't have to try so hard with.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's someone who's asking what 3, and it doesn't need to be 3, I'm bending the rules here, 3 top tips would you give to your past teachers?
Oh, okay. Okay, don't assume that the person getting picked on is the troublemaker. That was what happened to me a lot at school, which you wouldn't believe, but I was being bullied extensively, like every day. And there were numerous occasions where I got dragged out of class because I must be doing something to rile them up. So I think if there's one person who appears to be the target, don't assume that they're kind of the problem. That would be one of them. One thing that a teacher did looking back now, I was diagnosed at 38, but looking back, there are people throughout my life who very clearly knew I was autistic. There was the doctor, when I was 17, I went to my GP and I said, there's something broken about me and I don't know what it is. And he literally said to me, your brain is wired in a way that is different to most people's, and it's extraordinary, but it's going to make life hard for you. And I was like, oh, that's no help to me whatsoever, thanks very much. Because unless you actually say to me, you're autistic, it's going to go over my head. I'm not good at reading between lines. So, that was my family GP who'd known me 17 years. My teacher, when I was 9, 10 years old, made me the cupboard monitor of my class, which I genuinely thought was a real job until I was well into my 30s. So every lunchtime, she would give me the key to the cupboard, and I would go in there, and I would close the door, and it would be dark and low lit, and I would organise her cupboard for her. And as a gift, she would say, you can pick something from the cupboard and you can take that home with you. And I remember picking a little series of glass ducks, which I don't know what they were doing in there, but that was my job. And basically, I thought that this was something that needed doing and that I was stepping up to the plate in helping arrange this cupboard. And it was much later until I realised that she knew I was autistic. And she was giving me somewhere quiet and dark to go, away from the other kids, when I was overwhelmed in the playground. And there's so much compassion in that. There's so much empathy to give me somewhere, even without, discussing it, that would allow me to decompress so that I wouldn't melt down by the end of the day. And I've tried to get hold of her, and I have no idea where she is now. But, I'm so grateful for that. I do also wish that she had just said it. Apparently she took my mum aside and said, Holly needs to not go to that massive secondary school that you've got her down to go to. I don't think she's equipped for it. She needs to go to a very small school with very small classes in very low-lit spaces, where she's around other girls who are like her. And my mum, who's autistic, went, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. She's going to go to the big school. Because again, unless you say it, my mum won't get it. So, yeah, she knew. And I think that those levels of compassion, sometimes, if you're a teacher, if you are looking ways just to make days that little bit easier for the kids that are struggling, sometimes, just a quiet cupboard is what you need to just bring that, because I know that I don't know about with everybody else, but with me, when I'm overwhelmed, it will go up in stages. And if I can find something that brings the overwhelm down, I won't have a meltdown before I get there. So if I can get to here and then someone puts me in a cupboard, it will go down and I won't have a massive meltdown. So just those tiny things make an enormous difference.
Huge difference.
Huge difference.
I think this probably needs to be our last question. I'm just watching the clock. I can barely see it, actually, but anyway.
2 minutes, 32 seconds.
How do you manage executive functioning as a writer? This is someone who's a new columnist and struggling a lot to activate my executive functioning, even when I really want to.
I wish I knew the answer to this. I am either not doing any work at all or I'm working 17-hour days. Luckily, my hyperfocus, my ability to sit and do something without moving, without breathing, without drinking, without eating, without going for a pee, has helped me to write books a lot. But I find it very difficult to start, which is why I'm currently behind on a book I'm supposed to be writing. So executive functioning is really hard. And I have to, if I'm in hyperfocus mode, I have to set alarms to remind me to go for a wee, because my body will just shut off all body functions until it's wherever it wants to go. So I set those to make sure that I'm still, functioning as a live human. And in terms of actually sitting down and doing it, I don't know. I haven't worked out how to do that yet. Usually just the carrot and the stick. I bribe myself and then I tell myself there's going to be a punishment if I don't do it. I'm terrible at executive functioning, and I'm lucky that I work in a job where there's flexibility. If I don't want to work for a week, I don't work for a week. But that's not the case for most jobs. So you've just got to try and find ways to gently and affectionately get the best out of yourself. Sure. And if that means promising yourself a new pair of sunglasses or a necklace or whatever, then do whatever works.
Do what works. That's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for an absolutely wonderful and insightful and a very generous talk, Holly. Thank you so much.